Pride Month, of course, commemorates the Stonewall riots in 1969, a deciding moment in the LGBTQ plus rights movement. The first Pride marches began in New York just 1 year later in June of 1970, and many states followed with their own commemorative marches and rallies. Seattle Pride celebrations began in 1974 with the area's first Gay Pride Week. And here to share more on queer history in the Pacific Northwest is MOHAI's Devorah Romanek. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Really pleased to be here.
Well, we are pleased to have you. And I want to get to the history, obviously, first. That's why we're here. And history tells us that as long as Seattle has been named Seattle, there has been a queer community here. So tell me about that.
Absolutely. So Seattle was founded in 1851, and really from the beginning with the influx of migrant workers coming from really a great variety of places in the area that is now called Pioneer Square. There was just this great mix of people, mostly men, and the area south of Yesler was originally called Mill Street, was known for vice and gambling and drinking and sex working. And so there was, from the very beginning, some community and gay sex happening, what we would now call gay sex. That some of the terms we use don't really come in until the late 19th, early 20th century. But that was happening, and at that time there was a tolerance of that, a sort of open secret, if you will. And so we know a little bit about that from some of the accounts. But in 1893, the state of Washington passed a sodomy law, and so it was illegal to have that kind of sex. And actually, though, that is also part of how we know a lot about the community from that time was, from court records and newspaper accounts in that time. So there was community there, and it was diverse because the community there was diverse. And that started early on. Yeah.
So in the 20s and 30s, you would say that's when things started really changing, and not just Seattle, but other larger cities?
Yeah, absolutely, that's true. And so what happens in the 20s here in Seattle is there's prohibition, and so the clubs, just general clubs drinking in this area, Pioneer Square, and what is also called the Tenderloin. The clubs are literally underground. If people are familiar in Seattle, after the Great Fire, lots of spaces move literally underground. And so there were clubs for drinking during Prohibition underground, and many of those become gay clubs. And then in the 1930s, things really pick up, and the whole gay community really starts to flourish in a sense. There's just more bars, there's bathhouses, and there's a more sort of coalescing around this identity and experience.
And I want to get to the 60s where Pioneer Square was becoming kind of a hub for LGBTQ plus life. Tell me about that.
That's right. Well, even in the 1950s, where there's a great repression and the sort of Lavender Scare and the McCarthy era, they're the first lesbian bars in Seattle in the 1950s, starting with the Hub, and then there are 3 other bars that follow. And so things are picking up a little bit, though there's a lot of repression. But then in the 60s, things really start to change. In the whole era at that time, of course, there's a lot of political activity. And in 1967, a UW professor, Nick Heer, founds what's called the Dorian Society. And this is the first organization to really openly represent gay rights. And so there's a lot of activism that happens at that time.
And the 70s, so much happening during this time too. Tell me about it.
That's right. So in the 70s, this is, as you already mentioned, right after 1969 and the Stonewall Uprising, things start to get sort of organized across the nation, and that happens, as we also know, in 67 with the Dorian Club here too. And in the 70s, there's more and more grassroots organization, and so in 1974, we have our first Gay Pride here, organized by grassroots activists, LGBTQ plus activists here in Seattle. And, and because of the activism that started in the 60s in particular, there's also some repeal of laws. The sodomy law I mentioned is repealed in the 70s.
Wow. And that's when I understand Seattleite Rick joined Microsoft. So tell me about his contribution to the gay community.
So Rick Weiland was a software programmer and developer and a philanthropist. and he's actually Microsoft employee number 2.
Wow.
He went to prep school with Paul Allen and Bill Gates, and when they founded Microsoft, they asked him to join as a partner. But because he wanted a more balanced life, he became the general manager of Microsoft, so employee number 2. And so he's really important in the history of Microsoft and computer development, developing some programs and responsible for some very important early programming. And he's with Microsoft for, well, a little over, on and off, but 10 years.
Yeah.
And he retires in 1988 at the age of 35 because he wants to engage in more philanthropy with the money he has earned. And also because although he was out, a very out, proud man,
Right.
He felt a little alienated at Microsoft. I think Paul Allen and Bill Gates were very accepting of him, but he felt somewhat isolated there, even though in that time there was an organization for LGBTQ plus workers at Microsoft that started in the 80s. So he leaves and he engages in this philanthropy, and he had many philanthropic interests, but he focuses a lot on the LGBTQ plus community.
Amazing. And I know you guys at MOHAI have an exhibit right now for him. And thank you so much for being here today and telling us a little bit about the queer history here.
Absolutely. So glad to be here.
Yes. And that exhibit that Devorah mentioned, Pride, the Rick Whalen collection, is open now at MOHAI through October 5th.